Hello, and welcome to Electrifying Growth, a podcast brought to you by Edison Partners. I'm Chris Sugden, the managing partner here at Edison and your host. There are moments in a person or company's journey that are undeniably electric. The spark or sparks, if you will, that propel you or your company to new heights. With Electrifying Growth, we're here to have in-depth, real conversations with great leaders who have been there and done it before. Edison has been investing in high-growth technology companies for more than 35 years, and I have been here at Edison doing this investing piece for more than 20 years. We've led over 225 investments. We understand that it takes great leaders and visionaries to build market leaders. We are your support system, a CEO and management's entourage, if you will. Let's introduce this episode's guest. Hello, on this episode of Electrifying Growth, I'm really excited to be sitting down with Lorne Brown, an entrepreneur, a scale CEO, doing it again, is someone who I've actually known for over 20 years. He knows how to build, scale, and create markets in complex industries. In fact, even created a whole industry in a company called Operative, became one of the biggest names, is still today one of the biggest names in digital advertising technology. To today, when he's launched Lenora Health, a really cool startup, really trying to save what's the bane of all of our existence, healthcare spend. His track record of creating opportunities, creating markets, and working through challenges is remarkable. As the founder of and CEO of Frontstage Ventures, he's applying the same mindset he applied to his prior startups to healthcare, which is, as we all know, over a $1.5 trillion industry where companies have struggled to deliver real accountability for employee health. Lorne brings a founder's perspective on solving big problems, building business with clear outcomes, and challenging the status quo. Most importantly, what I appreciate about Lorne, and you'll hear this, is he loves to pay it forward. He's got a passion for entrepreneurship. I think you'll really get something out of this episode of Electrifying Growth. Lorne Brown, welcome to Electrifying Growth. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris. Always a pleasure to be in the same room with you, even if virtual.
That's right. This is one of the easiest and hardest because I told you before that the episode started to record here that I think we could do a Rogan. We've known each other so long, like we go a 3-hour, but for the audience, I think we're going to keep this in the normal course, but we've literally, there aren't too many people I can say I have a 20-year relationship with, which is pretty cool. So there is a little bit of old home week, but I think to start off, not so much the Edison Lorne, Chris Lorne relationship as much as the Lorne, how did you become an entrepreneur? And as I introduced the episode, we talked already about success with Edison and this company called Operative and then became Syntech, et cetera, and then Operative again. But is entrepreneurship in your DNA? Was it just you had an idea and it was just, what the hell, let's go? How did you even start?
Yeah, I'll rewind a little bit, but eventually you do enter the story. It's hard to tell a lot of stories without somehow tripping into Chris, but we'll rewind a little bit. You know, when I went to college, I went to SUNY Albany and it was a great school. And I was in the business school, which was a very competitive program. And all my friends got job interviews and I went along with the herd, did all the job interviews and they all got offers. And I remember being at a bar one night, I got 7 offers last week and I didn't get any. I got called back by a bunch of them. You're overqualified or maybe you'd be better off somewhere else. And so it actually turned out to be a blessing because when I left college, I decided to be a consultant and do different IT work. So I got experience at probably 12 or 13 different companies.
You're literally, to be clear, you hung your own shingle. This was starting your own business.
Yeah, well, this was me. No, I went and worked for a company called Robert Half, which had a consulting division for IT. And I found my way into a media publisher called CMP Media. And they had me doing these very remedial tasks in their advertising operations group, refreshing the pages. I mean, this is 1998 to see if the banners came up. And then I would check a box on a piece of paper and said, yeah, IBM, Tivoli, that came up. And so eventually I took on more responsibility, wound up helping them deploy one of the first ad servers in the market, which was called Net Gravity. And I stayed there as a consultant for 2 years. And then I said, you know what? I'm going to go try something else. And I went into financial services and spent about 3 years at a company called Royal Blue, deploying their New York office, leading deployment efforts, starting a support team. And a light bulb went off where I realized how efficient financial services was, especially equity trading desks, where we would literally go in and replace all the paper trails from people running tickets back and forth.
This is early days of straight-through processing, right? This is like early days.
That's right. We ended it with market data applications And I met a gentleman on the trading floor, a guy named Tony Thielman, who had a contract with the bank as well. We were at Bank Paribas at the time, and we were talking about starting a company. We were at a Starbucks, 7 a.m. one day, and I said, I have an idea, because I worked in online advertising and I realized how inefficient it was. I was like, why don't we deploy these financial trading concepts to advertising? And we can go out and start this advertising company. And all the people I used to work with at CMP are now at Fox and Comcast and the Wall Street Journal. And he liked the idea, and he said to go out in the market and have some conversations. And I did. And we both essentially resigned from our jobs. And he was a co-founder, also financed the company, and away we went.
That's pretty awesome. For those who are old enough to remember ad trafficking, the name was?
The original name was Traffic Mac. There was between that and Traffic King, but we realized Traffic King was too much like Burger King. So
it doesn't matter our exact who spoke to whom first, but I remember being a really, frankly, at that point, what I would consider young venture capitalist, having just started Edison at a conference, and you and I see each other. And as I remember it, but you may have a different recollection, you were sort of still building, but you're like, hey, we should do something together. Let's stay in touch.
Yeah, I think it was a couple years in, maybe '02, I ran into you. You were at the Mike Siegel's NYNMA Capital. I think he's still around, by the way. I think I see.
The bottom line is that's a little history in you never know where you're going to meet somebody. So showing up half the battle, right?
That's true. And I remember you listened to the pitch. I found you. I think I chased you down by the elevator. And you said, look, I like the pitch. And I said, we were about $1 million in revenue. And you said, when you get to 3 million, call me. And so about a year and a half later, I think I called you and I said, hey, Chris, we're at 3 million. What do you think? And
I remember it very similarly. So it's really funny that, and for those, the backstory in Edison was we now invest in a little bit further upstream companies than that, but we always like to stick to our strategy. And I love that when an entrepreneur actually remembers and CEO remembers that this is the time, that's pretty cool. So, and frankly, there's a long story here of the Traffic Mac became Operative. You got to talk a little bit about, you were the ground floor of internet advertising, like early days, and you built a pretty interesting capability. So not to diverge too much, but I think it's kind of cool how early you created a market in a way.
We did. And we started building technology, and we realized that the market wasn't even mature enough to adopt.
It needed the service, not the tech, right?
It was the Wild West, and it needed the service. And you literally saw people, I mean, this is the days when Monster.com just first came out, and all these sort of recruiting sites. And I would see these racks open for hiring 100 ad traffickers, which is like a back office ad ops role. And I was like, wow. I'm like, that's a ridiculous amount of people. And so we decided that we would create a service for companies to outsource that. And so we brought people in-house. We created the technology for ourselves to make that more efficient. And it was really one of the first, now SaaS, but it was, remember, a web-based service or an ASP, and that customers could log in, they could check the status. And so we built a nice business, almost up to, $3-4 million in services revenue. And, that's when we had a very fortunate conversation. I don't really tell this story often, but it just feels right now. It came to me. We were sitting at the Wall Street Journal trying to get them to outsource their ad ops to us. And we went through the presentation, and the guy goes, unfortunately, we can't do outsourcing because all of our employees are in the union. And I was like, never heard that one before. He's like, but if you could go back to slide 7, and it was literally the picture we had of our ad operations portal. He's like, can we buy that from you? And I was like, sure. He's like, what would it cost me? I was like, how's 10 grand a month sound? And away we went. And they were our first client. We put a sales front end on top of it and a billing back end behind it. And it became the first enterprise sales, operations, and billing system in advertising, which, as you know, became incredibly important as media started to splinter into beyond display, into mobile and video, and now what you have today with linear and CTV and all sorts of buying methods and different things. So it really became the technology that the market used to trade media directly with each other, and still is today.
So that story sounds so much like just up and to the right, but I know, and you know, that none of them are. Rather than kind of me bias your sort of thoughts of that journey, because it was a Traffic Mac to Operative, and I'll fill in a little bit. You highlight, I think there's some other entrepreneur founders, lessons learned, et cetera. But Operative gets bought by a firm called Syntech that was owned by Francisco Partners. So your role, even on the way to Syntech, is interesting, and the road not necessarily being up and to the right, but also even post that. So, I mean, I know I'm just throwing it out there like wide open. I'll hone it in. I'm kind of curious how you would talk about the things that you'd leave as CEO learnings. Because what ultimately, for the audience's sake here, anytime we make 5x our money and you talk nothing, it's nothing but headlines and it's all great, right? But there's a lot of other stuff that goes into that all great. So I'd love to, what kind of highlights for you come out of that as a million, but what ones stick out the most?
Yeah, the road to success is never a straight line. And I think one of the things you're alluding to, which is not totally unique, but I think somewhat unique, is that I was CEO of the business at 3 separate times. You know, when we first started the company, and then when we got a little bigger, raised capital, we wanted to show that we had a bigger profile. We brought an outside CEO, and then that person stopped working out. And then I took over CEO again, and then we sold the company, and then I to private equity in it, and they merged us with another company. I went to work for that CEO, and then the board asked me to take the company over again. And so it was a interesting, 15 years where I got to see a lot of different things. But, I learned a few things. And when things are going well, the board meetings are good, the exec meetings are good, the client meetings are good, bookings are good, right? Everything's good. But when things are not good, and there could be a lot of reasons for not good, the company needs to focus. And I think that's where most people go wrong, is they don't know that they're in a position or a situation that requires urgent attention. And maybe the board, over the course of several board meetings, starts to figure that out. But it's really the CEO's responsibility to self-realize what the situation is and dictate the pace of change. And, one of the things that, I remember in 2010, when you decided, hey, Lorne, I want you to take the company over from this point, and we really want to see you double revenue in the next few years. We had to figure out, we had a system that was sort of talked about as order management. We were doing a whole bunch of other things that I think were a distraction. We were hiring too many people, and I think we were confusing the market. And so I really wanted to focus on getting the company to win the market back. And the best way to do that, and what we did, is it was a rally cry. It's sort of a term from Patrick Lencioni. We also called it a thematic goal, or as we learned in West Point leadership, commander's intent. Like, what is most important right now? And that's a question that's worth debate with the team, because once everyone buys into this what's most important right now concept, the decision-making can trickle down to others. The customers feel and now understand what's most important at that time. And for us, we really wanted to focus on a category, because our product had no category. People were calling it order management. So we called it ad business management, and we defined it. And what we did is we mapped our very unique capabilities with the things that customers valued the most. And where those things intersected is where we focused our time. And that's how we defined the category. We said, these are the most important thing, cross measurement.
Now, was the most important thing to you or to the client, so to speak?
Really to the clients. We got pretty obsessed with the clients. And so what that really did is we defined order management. This is before we even went out to the market. And what that started to do is it started to align the product roadmap, what we should keep doing more of, what we need to double down on, what we need to stop doing. It started to align operations. It started to allow us to mobilize sales. We actually did cost outs. We did them super quickly. And that is something CEOs often delay, but it's really something that you should use to your advantage, because there are people inside the company that are not on board with that particular vision. They were married to the old vision. They don't want to give up on a sort of product line that maybe they have been working on forever, right? Their baby. So it's an opportunity to remove underperformers, toxic employees, toxic managers, people that are really creating friction inside the company that, it's like the Jim Collins on and off the bus. It's like, you've got that opportunity, you're turning the company around, rip the Band-Aid off and do it all at once. And that became the first of many rally cries. And we really got good at dictating that we are at a new rally point, right? So once we had the category in the market, then we turned to bookings. Bookings is now the most important thing. And by the way, there was like an end date to that, right? It was like for the next 9 months, we think this is the most important thing. And we even got engineering and everyone else involved in engineering would say, why are we showing up to meetings about bookings and all these sort of other things? But it was really important to rally the company.
Make sure everybody was involved in the bookings. Yep. Really cool. So to win the market, that there's a more generalized theme there that I know is like near and dear to your heart, and you're even doing it in a new business venture. Talk a little bit about that. Talk a little bit about how you go about that. I know it's a lot more than a 5-minute spiel, but maybe just give some thoughts to the folks out there listening of how they should think about that.
Yeah, totally. You know, when I left Operative, and Operative is, I am so grateful that Francisco Partners bought the company because they are great owners. They continue to own Operative today. The executive team is first class. Michael Grassi came in there and really turned this company, which I kind of think about as like taking it from good to great. And he's really taken it into this built to last state. And they are really doing a great job driving the market and continuing that growth. And it gave me the opportunity to go out and do something new. And I remember being at your event at West Point. This wasn't too long ago.
A couple years ago. Yep.
And I was sitting there with Al Sabloy, and I think most of the audience knows who Al Sabloy is. Current CEO of Butterfly, former CEO of Tango, did a lot of incredible returns for Edison, gave him CAPE awards, all sorts of things. And so Al was on my board at Operative. When we sold the company, he wound up leaving, and we were sitting in a coffee shop because we had some time to kill. And he was just coming off of this interview with a journalist about the Butterfly story. And he had just finished his $500 million investment from Partners Group. So he's feeling good. He's got this vibe going, great energy. And we're trying to figure out what we're going to do. And because we've been talking about it for a few months, hey, let's start a seed fund, and we could even launch our own companies. We could seed our own companies, or we could invest in smaller companies and maybe, help provide them guidance or change their business models. And, so that was really the meeting where we were going to try to really hone in on that business model. And he starts telling me about the interview, and he goes, you know what? Before we get into the business of what we're going to do together, and I want to hear you out. He's like, I just want to tell you how excited I am about the butterfly model and just the model in general. I'm so excited. I'm going to write a book about it. And I said, a book? He's like, yeah. So, the rest of the world could sort of know how to remove friction and how to change how software and services get monetized in the market, because, SaaS never has accountability for the things that it's supposed to do. You just promises and you pay them no matter what. He's like, and I figured out the way. I want people in all these other industries to know that there's a way. And I go, Al, time out. I'm like, let's start a venture studio that launches its own companies exclusively with this model. And we'll do like 5 or 10 of them, and you could write the book later. And so we had a big laugh.
It's not telling everybody quite yet, right? It's not tell the world quite yet.
Yeah, don't tell the world quite yet. And there was a lot there. And that's really when Frontstage Ventures, the studio, was born. And, we quickly realized that there were lots of other markets, like the market Butterfly served, which is energy. And the things that make that model work well, which is essentially a corporate expense line takeover model. We call it the strategic insertion method. Our acronym is the SIM. And it works out really well in markets that have fast running rivers, which essentially means like lots of money pouring in at high velocity, inefficiencies, and low ownership or low satisfaction rate at a company. And we quickly landed on commercial healthcare as our first idea. And as you can imagine, you have a ton of experience in that market. There is a lot of money being wasted. And that's $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion in spend in that market by employers who are not getting what they pay for. And to put the 1 to 1.5 trillion in perspective, the US government spends about 5 trillion a year in general. So $1 trillion is about 20% of that. The corporate profit level in the United States is 4 trillion in corporate profits. So healthcare is 25% of the corporate profits in the United States. So it is a massive amount of money, and it's the second largest expense line at an employer, but nobody owns it.
Double click on that. I know exactly what you mean, but to just a lay person who's not involved, as an entrepreneur, you know that healthcare is a big pain in the neck to provide your employees and a big cost. But when you say no one owns it, what do you mean?
Yeah, so this is our inspiration for Lenora Health, which is the studio's first company. So when I was CEO and we had 1,000 people in the company, that was a lot of people to look after. Healthcare was always a frustrating topic for me, and I could never get straight answers from the CFO or HR.
Just, it was always going up. That's all you knew, right? The premium was going up.
It was always going up, and people would complain, and I would want to fix what they were complaining about. And every time I fixed it, it was like, okay, more cost. So it's like, well, what do you want less of? So you either want more cost or less of something. I was like, no, I don't. and in order for me to kind of figure out what's going on, I realized I had to spend a lot of cycles on it. And I was like, I don't want to spend cycles on it because I have to drive bookings.
I have to run the business.
I'm going to have a bad meeting with Edison, so most companies are focused on their core business, and healthcare rarely makes its way to the executive table or the board table for that matter. And it gets delegated to the CFO. The CFO delegates it to HR, and HR spreads it across their team. They hire a benefits manager, and it's like this hot potato that no one actually touches. And the other issue with commercial healthcare for employers or self-funded healthcare is that they can't actually measure it because of HIPAA and other constraints. You're not actually allowed to look at real data that is indicating how well things are going. And as you know, if you can't measure it, you certainly can't manage it and optimize it. So it goes unmanaged and unoptimized, and therefore the ownership of healthcare gets pushed out to the third parties who are servicing the healthcare. And to me, that's like, if you're a technology company, you saying, you know what, we don't have a CTO. I'm going to make our account manager at Amazon Web Services the CTO. That'll be our CTO, right? And that's essentially what people are doing in healthcare. It's a bigger budget than technology. And it's also like incredibly important. So for us, that became super exciting to apply this model where we can really go in and help employers regain control of their healthcare. And, we went out and started Lenora Health, and it's been a really interesting journey. We're almost at the 18-month mark, and we've accomplished a lot.
So if you think about the entrepreneurs, the founders, those in startup plus land out there, in many ways, this is, I'll call it round 3 or 4 for you. And I say that because you got told in and out of Operative, but what's the thing that makes an entrepreneur like you go? What makes you excited to start Lenora? What you go from, I'm going to start a venture studio to wait, I'm going to start a company using the ideas that we're feeding the venture studio. What's the motivation?
Yeah, when we started the studio, we had a couple of motivations. One of those motivations was to create an environment that was very founder friendly. And so we created a venture studio. We didn't start a fund. We actually created an actual company, and we raised money and sold equity into the company. So it's a pretty interesting model where every company we start, whatever position the investor has, they have that position in the cap tables we launch for the other companies or investments we make. They get their pro rata share of those.
Yep.
So in a way, every company we start, they're in for life. We could raise again at the studio level and there could be some dilution, but it's a very compelling model because you're really grandfathered into the studio's cap table. And that was exciting because a lot of CEOs exit companies, and there's tons that you have that and they either go start another company or they start a fund, right? And it's sort of very cliche to go start a fund. So we wanted to do something that was very, very different.
Well, I guess I'm saying it this way. Why? Because is it the operator gene in you? You like not so much get your hands dirty, but you want to help other entrepreneurs, which is kind of cool, to pay it forward aspect. But is it the being an investor feels too far away from the action?
Yeah. I like the challenge. I like the chase. When there's something to be done that's very big, that everyone else thinks is not possible, that is extremely energizing to me. And what I really loved about this model that the studio adopted as its core model for every company it launches is that it gives every market that needs change an opportunity for that change. Because in every one of those markets, the people that are not going to make change in those markets are the status quo groups, right? The people that are already entrenched that want to protect their position. And if you think about advertising, if you think about healthcare, if you think about pretty much any market where there's a sea of people kind of in the middle that are critical to the trade.
By taking some value out of the value chain, right?
Both sides of the equation that are actually doing the buying and selling, you have an opportunity to make change, but no one from the inside is going to make change. So I love the idea of going to the top of the food chain where the buyer sits, which in Lenora's case is the employer, and badging ourselves to, step in front of that supply chain and make changes from the top down. And the more clients that you sign on to make those changes, the more power you get from a change perspective. And then you could start measuring. You have this 360 view of, all the different things that are going on, and you could start to influence how things get done and literally change how an industry might transact from buyer to seller. And that to me is super exciting because Operative did it in a different way and it just took longer to get there. And so what was exciting to me was, all right, how do I get to where Operative landed, which was a great success story, but how do I do it faster, right? And, I'm really excited. Lenora is only 18 months old. We have an executive team. We have a customer base. We're generating revenue. We acquired a tech platform. We have a set of world-class advisors from different health tech unicorns, and we have the best investor base I can hope for. And everything that we do, I consider to be the modern way to start a business, but it also helps that we're using this SIM model to deploy our commercialization because it really does remove friction when you're talking to customers because they realize that they're like, well, hold on a minute. You're going to invest in me. I don't pay you anything, no OpEx or CapEx. You're going to create a center of excellence, in this case around healthcare. And you only make money when you perform above the discount you're giving me in advance.
When you finally save me money, that's when you make money.
When you save me money, right? Flavor of a gain share. And they let their guard down. They realize that you're there sitting on the same side of the table, willing to take risk on their behalf to make
They'll start sharing more information with you. You're part of their team.
And they know they need the changes made. And that's
what's really crazy, Lorne, not to cut you off, but we've got a company that was originally called PHX, now Zealous. We obviously have Al's first one, Tango, Butterfly. We've not yet had the good fortune to invest in Lenora, but I think about why there are so few of these. They used to be in the day called gain share models. You may call it something else, but this strategic insertion meets we're going to win together. It is back to Al's book idea, right? We have a big ROI, but it's up to you to go unlock it, but buy our software, right? That's SaaS, right? Like trust us, but once you use it, it's as a 20 plus year tech investor, I'm like, first of all, we should do more of these. And second, why isn't this everyone's model? Part of it tells you there's probably some software that doesn't quite deliver the ROI, but that's a different story for a different time. But you know what I mean? Like everyone should
I'll tell you why a lot of these gain share models don't work very well. It's because when deploying a gain share model, what most companies do is they create an ROI for the client, which they should, and that's the best practice. And then they say, okay, don't pay us anything unless we hit this metric, right? Maybe that's more revenue. Maybe that's a higher average price for your sales. And maybe it's cost reduction, but it all sits on the client side and all the measurement points sit with them. And ultimately you can't get at it. And you're not in control of the billing. So ultimately what happens is you wind up in a debate with the client over how much money you owe them. And then in no time at all, they'll be like, look, we just want to pay you a license fee. Or cancel because you taught them how to do it and now they could do it without you. And so the beauty of what Al came up with at Butterfly is that you're literally taking over the expense line. You're becoming the customer of record.
You're taking it over, literally.
The risk of that. You're putting your special sauce into it and you're showing that you're in a position of control so you can upgrade that supply chain and all the products and services that go with it before it hits the end user, which in this case, his employees, or in Al's case was in restaurants. And you bill the client the expense with your discount in it. And then if there's saving share to be had, you control that through the billing process. And since you're owning that supply chain, you now have access to all the measurement you need. And so you become the center of excellence with the measurement and the billing, and you could run the gain share like a business as opposed to having it be come up in a QBR and have the customer debate you,
That you really did something that they did, right? Back and forth. Well, it's funny. Here we are, not to go political, but we're 2 weeks in, and it's kind of like you guys were the Sim is Doge. Look, Elon's inserted himself, and no one was going to change from inside. It's kind of an interesting parallel when you say, oh my God, we're spending money on this. It's like the client doesn't even know where the healthcare dollar is going, to your point. Because like you said, it's hot potato.
No, they definitely don't. There is an enormous amount of hidden information, and the industry in healthcare works in 1-year cycles.
Right. It's an annual renewal.
And there's really no precedent for more than that. I think we're going to see that change over time because I think it has to. But in the meantime, it's really difficult for an executive who's running healthcare to figure out what they're spending, what their risk pool looks like, what they could do to improve their healthcare consumption, how they can provide better programs for their high-cost claimants, who their rising risks are, and how to get to those people.
It's like this internet advertising sales guy, digital advertising sales guy became a healthcare expert. That speaks to entrepreneurs. You got to love it. You just go all in a category and become super passionate about it. It's amazing. But I am going to take you back, sort of founder, entrepreneur lessons here. And actually, this one's more towards boards and investors and everyone who's a stakeholder that's not in the business, that is invested in the company. Again, board members, how far we are from knowing what's really going on. And you can take the shot at, I'm saying Edison, independent board members. Al's one of the best board members I've ever been around. But it's the Titanic, it's the tip of the iceberg problem. So now you're just in any old board seat. To your point, focus and almost success creates complacency. I give all my own cliches. I want to hear here's your lessons. Like there's probably 20, maybe even more than that times in a board meeting you want to go, just ask this question. or let's go deeper here. Talk a little bit about the advice for board members or even management team members that the CEOs gotten off course. What do you do to get the board to kind of talk about the right issues and get engaged? You know what I mean?
Totally. When I had my first board meeting, you were in it. I didn't read the board deck, but I showed up and presented the board deck. And I realized, it might have been Al, after the meeting, pulled me aside and he said, that was the right content. It was a decent meeting, but you kind of read the board deck to everyone. And everyone had already read the board deck. So maybe we could figure out how to create more constructive debate inside the board meeting. And he gave me a few ideas. But then I started to really think about this. And what I quickly realized is that boards, like anything, are a team, right? And so when you're on your quest, not only do you need to get the executive team aligned, but the board needs to be aligned as well. And those meetings are necessary. And I always loved them. I grew to love them because they were a forcing function. They became this line in the sand that I was actually able to use with my own team to create alignment. And that's why I always brought my executive team for a portion of the board meeting into the meeting to present. And that did a number of different things. In real time, the board would share feedback to those executives on the sales plan, the engineering plan, the delivery plan, and they got to hear it directly from the board, which was like air cover for me, because if your management team is not in part of the board meeting, you have to play telephone and say the board said this, the board said that, right? And it's kind of a waste of time. It really helps the executive understand what they have to do, get the board feedback, and then as we go make changes based on board reaction, my friction's removed, right? I'm just helping them because they were in the meeting. And personally, I used it to make sure my initiatives were on point. And so every time I did a board meeting, I would make 3 slides: State of the Union, headwind, tailwind, and what I'm doing about it. Okay, that's 4. And so if you didn't read the whole board deck, if you just read those 4 slides, I put all the good stuff, the not good stuff, what we were doing about the not good stuff, all up front, right? I would literally dump all my candy in the lobby just to make sure that, there were no surprises and that I could have board alignment and debate. And I always made sure the package was out early, and I would call you and I would call Al and Michelle and everyone on the board before the board meeting, tease out the issues. So board week was not the meeting. Board week was me calling the board members because I wanted to have a meeting where we could show up and immediately start debating things. No presenting. I'd do a little recap of the State of the Union, 5 minutes, and then spending 3.5 hours actively debating those things became incredibly useful for me. And I think
for the record, this was sort of Lorne 2.0, right? This wasn't the first traffic mag. And I guess when I'm a young entrepreneur, first time entrepreneur, not age wise, first time entrepreneur, second, but has making money and has a board. You just gave me some great tools, but they don't necessarily have the confidence to sort of, like you said, I'm going to have a conversation. Is it the secret sauce, these calls? Like before, find out where people are? Is that the secret sauce? Was it just putting all the stuff up front? Maybe it's a little bit of all of it, but like the one or two things a CEO has to do to have a successful board meeting.
Yeah, I think there's really two key things. I think one is, it's might sound like silly and maybe most people know this, but you need a good deck template, right? And I've seen so many board decks, including my early ones for myself, but founders send me board decks all the time. And I look at these decks and I'm just like, oh God. I'm like, the board is going to be really used if this deck goes, don't send this deck out ever again. And it really does need to follow that framework.
So your template you just gave is key, is what you're saying.
Just get a template so you can get super focused, right? And that's where you could do the State of the Union, headwinds, tailwinds, and what we're doing about it, because the board wants to be grounded very, very quickly in what's going on, right? You have to have the financials that needs its own section. Every group should have its own section, sales, depending on company, but let's just say sales, engineering, delivery, finance, like all those things need to be there, but really front load it. And then let the board know what the debate topics are going to be so they can show up and think about it. And don't send anything last minute or, I always froze time when the board meeting went out. So when the package goes out, I always aim for 3 days ahead of time. Business stops at that point, as far as I'm concerned, with the board, right? A new development comes in, fine, super material development, maybe you need to talk about it. But like the board does not want to be confused with all new information that could sort of mangle with what they've already digested, right? It's like you could bring it up in a meeting, but like late material is not a good idea, right? And so
that also comes up as like squirrel. Right? Like, look over there.
Right. Oh, this just happened. That just happened. It's like, no. Like, it's okay. Like, you have to draw lines.
The only thing that's okay in that is when you landed a new deal. That's the old trick, right? Like,
By all means. By all means. Wait for the board meeting to start, right? Maybe the night before at the dinner or whatever. But the calls were incredibly important. And you and I did so many of these calls, and they were productive. And they might seem like a waste of time, but creating that alignment, the board meeting always happens before the board meeting. Like if the board did not show up incredibly relaxed and excited, you didn't do the meetings, right? And I had 7 board members, if you remember. I'm sure some of your board members only have 4 or 5, and that's much more.
You had a big cast of characters to manage.
So the pre-calls were always important because that's when people shared what was on their mind. And then when the board was in the meeting together, you might say something and I would turn to someone else, and I might say like, I know you agree somewhat, but I think you have a different point of view to someone else. And then they would speak.
Because you had those calls, right.
Everyone needs to dump their thing on the table because otherwise, just like a management meeting or executive team, people become dysfunctional when they don't air what they really want to see. And then there's no debate. There's no conflict. Without conflict, there's no commitment. With no commitment, there's no accountability. And without accountability, no results, right? And it's the same thing at the board level as it is the management level.
That right there, that last 10 seconds was amazing. Okay, so we've got really good board deck template, State of the Union. Let's get the wins out, but we're not going to bury the bad news, but we're going to give them the good stuff. And then what we're doing about it on the headwinds is that
That's right. And then each manager can go into more detail in their section of building on that plan.
Perfect. That's true toolkit stuff. I'm going to pivot to a little bit of rapid fire. And the fact we didn't talk any golf from someone I know from the picture behind you. We're both very passionate about golf. So do a couple rapid fire in golf, a couple about being a dad, and then a couple about work. So you ready? These are rapid fire. Your favorite golf course?
My favorite golf course is the Ocean Course in Kiowa Island. And that also happens to be the picture behind me.
That is my favorite too, which is kind of ironic. And I don't know if we ever actually shared that. Favorite golfer of all time?
Tiger Woods is obviously the stock answer. I'll go with Tiger Woods. He
hard to go wrong.
Big on my generation, love what he's doing even after as a golfer. But I'm a big fan of regular golf. I have a fantasy golf league that I commission with some friends who are also obsessed with golf.
Been that for a long time too.
We've been doing that for a long time, 15 years. So golf's a big part of my life and it's a nice outlet.
So I know you're a family, work, golf, and work in golf, sometimes you'd like to be able to change that order, personally speaking as well, but where it typically comes first. Loaded question. Father of two.
Yep. 2 boys, 9 and 12.
The day you sold the company or the day your kids were born, bigger event?
You know, I'm going to have to go with kids are born, because selling the company took longer than 9 months. So the process of having a baby went quicker than the process of selling the business. But it was a very rewarding process. And I remember the day my son Hudson was born, and he was born, and it was actually the week after Hurricane Sandy. And all the hospitals in New York were flooded, and NYU, we were supposed to deliver at, and they closed NYU. So we wound up at New York downtown, and my son was born essentially in Chinatown. And he loves to tell that story about how he was born in Chinatown. But yeah, nothing can beat bringing a human into this.
Last one. This could be a whole podcast. So I put it in rapid fire. From the standpoint of balance, work-life balance, hard. I almost say it's not possible. I've been there for my big kids, lots of events, and I think I'm a good dad. But how have you found that to be possible or not possible? Have you picked your moments? What's been your method? Because you work your ass off to be able to start these companies.
Yeah, it took a while to realize, and I always did not have good work-life balance. That became a skill. And what I quickly learned is that I needed to focus on my mental health. And what that really meant was a few different things. One, there was a point in time where I needed to get a coach. And I didn't know what kind of coach I needed, but it turned out to be a mindfulness coach. And what I realized about mindfulness is that Tiffany, who was my coach at the time, was also an executive coach, because the things that happen at work are also related to people, because companies are not companies. They're just a group of people trying to do something. So we did these once a week coaching sessions. I also got very focused on renewing my energy and taking breaks throughout the day. So I always do one thing in the middle of the day so that my afternoon could be as productive as my morning. And then my evening I can be very present and not as stressed out as I would be as if I sort of grind it all day throughout the day. So I'll take a break in the middle of the day.
Like a walk, a coffee, like
I'll take a walk, I'll do a nap, I'll meditate, I'll do yoga, I do flotation therapy, anything for an hour where a lot of the things that are on my mind can quiet down, and then I can start to raise my thinking back up again and have that sort of bird's eye view and just make better decisions. And now I'm on to my next version of that, which is manifestation. And there could be an entire podcast on manifestation, but it has been incredibly interesting to manifest different ideas, say them as if they're happening in the present moment, take bad things that might be happening or things that I'm worried about and sort of convert those to what they would actually look and feel like if they were done in the way I wanted them to be done, and reassure myself that the universe has it back. And
they sort of will something into existence.
That's right. And they might sound foo-foo to some people, but they work. And it's one of the reasons I got really close with my family.
Well, athletes do that.
Absolutely. Every NFL stadium has about 8 flotation tanks in it now. I think athletes like Tom Brady and others have kind of paved the way to draw the conclusion between
even that manifestation too. They are visualizing the plays.
Right. Rapid visualization, which you could do. I sat down before this podcast, I closed my eyes and I visualized us having a very good meeting.
That's awesome. All right. Last question. My first startup that I joined was a magazine targeted at young guys. We had this really cool column. It was targeted at kind of guys just out of college. We called it When I Was 25. We'll get these older folks to write so I don't like to have the question be, what do I regret? Because don't have any regrets, just have everything you learn from, right? So it's sort of if I knew then what I know now, what would you tell your 25-year-old self besides, hey, Tony, let's start this business? What would you tell your 25-year-old self now, given your breadth of success and work you've done?
Yeah, I think that when I was founding Operative, I felt like I was always rushing and really trying to grow the business. I don't know if there was I was driven by fear or things that maybe happened from childhood that motivated me in a probably an unproductive way. Like, you're not going to get there. You're always late to class. Whatever it was I heard as a child, I think was the driving force of when I started the company. And then I realized that you could grow the company with vision and love and passion and sort of have a different point of view of what motivates you and what drives you. And I think having that point of view allowed me to make better decisions, be more methodical, include my team more in what we wanted to do. And inevitably, when you get other people to weigh in on things that they've already achieved maybe, or they were the standard for, and start to include other people, you save cycles. And, Operative, took us 13 years to sell it, something like that, Chris. So I would have loved to save cycles and not fall into all the traps I think that I see a lot of founders falling into now. I have appreciation for it because I fell into those traps too, right?
If I can distill down what I think I heard, it's funny, I go back to West Point learning. There's sort of a slow down to go fast. You never feel like you can do that, especially in startup land and early stage of company land. And you sort of said that, like you always feel like
build your business plan in Excel, build a model that shows how you're going to go from TAM, your total addressable market, all the way to your EBITDA in the 5th year. And I promise you, if you include enough people in that conversation and spend time prosecuting that model, you're going to wring out so many issues and avoid so many pitfalls right out of the gate. And then you could refine as you go. I think too many people just jump in with the idea and they don't even really think about who's going to buy it, how they're going to build. There's everything sort of an afterthought. And so I think slow down to speed up. We're humans, right? We have to calibrate just like technology does, right? And we're not technology. We don't have APIs. And management teams are not marriages. They're arranged marriages. And they all have different DNA and personality types. And so you as the CEO or leader in any organization have to figure out how to make all those parts work together. And doing that is very rewarding. And I'm glad I learned some of those techniques. And I have you to thank for a lot of it, Chris. The CEO summits I went to, sitting in those closed door sessions. My favorite session was you teed up a conversation with a bunch of CEOs and you left the room. It was the best thing you could have ever done because I learned so much in that meeting.
From other people. Look, it's a two-way street. We'll end on a mutual admiration because I certainly appreciate all you did and have done. And the great news is still young enough to do it again, which is even better. So to Lorne Brown, your success, what success you actually helped Edison deliver to our investors. But what's really cool is other entrepreneurs now have the chance. So hopefully those who are listening, give Lorne a yell because not only Lenora and healthcare, but the model, you heard about that, but just an all-around good person, frankly. So Lorne Brown, thank you for joining today and for, frankly, a 20-year relationship with Edison. But thanks for joining Electrifying Growth.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate you and the team. Thanks for having me.
Likewise. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too, bud.
Thank you for joining this episode of Electrifying Growth. A special thanks to this week's guest for sharing their time and insight. For more resources, inspiration, and a look inside the Edison Partners Network, sign up for our newsletter at www.edisonpartners.com. Click on the Stay in the Know button in the top right corner of our webpage. Thank you again.